psychobiology. He studies methods for measuring our response to poetry, painting, music, and humor quantitatively in psychology. And he is the guy I've been looking for all these years. And he's sitting right here on our own doorstep. He has another book called Conflict, Arousal, and Curiosity. And he's a gestalt man all the way. He studies structures, patterns, all the way. And the general crowd around him conceal him from the view, of course. His own feet.
The very name psychologist is enough to conceal anything.
Whose benefit is this mic for, by the way?
That's not meant any more than the
James Joyce? Who's the author?
Have you seen it yet?
I don't know.
ꔓヶᖃ. This is the book that you're talking about that was written in Trieste. And I wondered whether you've seen a copy.
No, yes, sir.
Writing, right?
Handwritten text.
By the way, who's this? Who's running this machine? You are, sister? But this is we'd had a chap here telling us about the efforts of the Italians to translate James Joyce Finnegan's Wake into Italian. I gathered that it was almost completed at the time that he was talking to us. James Joyce, Finnegan's Wake, is an account of the impact of man's technologies on man, his own psyche. And there's very few people who know really that that's what the theme of the book is. I think we've got far too much brightness, so we're going to turn on this light, get rid of those horrible lights overhead right now. There we are. And pull that one up there.
Well, Mark, what do you think? If we take a picture, why not pull the table back?
Well, if they turn up, but they may not make it tonight, they may not find us. I'm sort of hoping they won't. They came last year. They were here last year.
Oh, it was a great gang.
It's a kind of touring group of university students. They make several universities. But anyway, Berline is very exciting stuff as far as I'm concerned. And by the way, he uses the semantic differential, Osgood. There is a method for measuring meaning and measuring human response to paintings, poetry, humor, anything, by verbal means. No labs, no audience samples. Anybody will do, as well as the next person. You know the Osgood semantic differential.
I'm afraid not, Marshall.
Well, I'm happy to report it all to you. And it's strictly non-lab. They've gone right past objectivity into subjectivity. The psychology Berline plays with is entirely subjective, like the new journalism. Who's talking about this?
The psychological stress evaluator, they can tell by voice if you're lying.
Mm-hmm.
Because of a third dimension in the resonance.
Mm-hmm. The best doesn't, or the sound of your voice will do it for you. Well, this is interesting because there's a book called And There Was Light by Jacques Roussillon, in which he explains that when he lost his sight, his ears perked up a good deal, and he could tell exactly what was going on in the mind of anybody who spoke to him. Hidden behind the voice, he could tell the whole motivation, He was a very important man in the resistance in France because he could tell spies instantly. He could read their voices like open books. And so this is the sort of thing we're talking about right here. Recently, a third frequency modulation was discovered, indistinguishable to the naked ear, caused by muscle tremors, is always present in normal speed. But in times of stress, as when you're lying, this frequency modulation disappears from the human voice, and the PSE chart shows when it's missing. But the blind person can pick this up quite easily, too. But I thought I'd just mention the fact that the old laboratory, so-called objective testing, is out. New subjectivity has come in, and it's verbal in form. They simply test you by your verbal responses. They'll put two objects in front of you and say, now, which do you like the most? Do you like it very much more? Which is ugly? Is this fast? That mic on the table. You just say to the people, is that fast? Now people don't know what you mean. They put down the answer anyway. They don't explain any of the question. Put down the answer anyway. And they discovered to their amazement that people know a great many things that they don't know they know. They pop all this into a computer, by the way. It's not done by ordinary processing. But they use 7 preferences, seven forms of preference and evaluation, all verbal, and no lab stuff and no audience samples.
It's like the expanded Likert scale. The 5 value is expanded to 7 values. It's the one that you can tell differences. They group themselves better this way. But I think what is perhaps most interesting about this is the way of discovering the hidden ground of assumption.
Well, here you see this picking up a person who's lying, hidden ground. But Gestalt psychology began in 1915, Berline reports. The first person to use the word was a Danish chap in a treatise in 1915. Pick your ground is Gestalt's approach to situations. That lamp is figure on table is ground. The two change each other. They do something to each other. If you put the table is figure on the rug is ground, the rug is figure on room is ground, and so on, and they keep banging against each other all the time. That is Gestalt psychology. It's figure ground psychology. And it's a dynamic psychology, and it's based on structures. No point of view exists in the Gestalt psychology. What we had been working on earlier this year, we hope to continue with right now, and that is power. We've learned quite a lot about it in society. There's a book by Rollo May, which he sent me a few weeks ago, called Power and Innocence. A search for the sources of violence. And it's very simple, basic. And I'll just read you one passage. I think it's page 48, or is that 42? Right. Power is simply the quest for identity. The fourth phase is aggression, when self-assertion is blocked over a period of time, as it was for the Jews for many years, and as it is for every minority people. A stronger form of reaction tends to develop. I spent 3 years in Salonika. I found that the 100,000 ┬ßaphardic Jews living there, 1/3 of the population of the city actually made up for the cultured intelligentsia of the city. There was a complete absence of anti-Semitic prejudice such as existed in the rest of Europe and America. There was also a complete absence of the aggressiveness associated in this country with Jews. Indeed, the motto in Salonika was, it takes 2 Jews to outwit a Greek and 2 Greeks to outwit an American. An Armenian, sorry. The Armenians, the group at the bottom of the totem pole, were the ones in whom aggression and sharp bargaining had developed. He relates this aggression and this violence to deprivation and minority stories. So, when aggression tendencies are completely denied to the individual over a period of time, they take their toll in a zombie-like deadening of consciousness, neurosis, psychosis, or violence. That it is a kind of frustration and suppression. Did we also, since we saw you have our encounter with Dr. Hubbard and his group? Dr. Hubbard, had we talked about that? Dr. Hubbard.
We talked about that in this
I see, good.
last.
Well, then let's switch to another area of structures and power. And we have
an interesting article here in the Globe and Mail on the January 13th, if any of you noticed it, on Is Bureaucracy Stifling Urban Progress? Well, title doesn't tell you really what this chap is driving at is that...
What's his name again, Barry?
Lithwick.
Lithwick?
Lithwick.
Carleton University professor of political science.
Retired. He was with the Ministry of Urban Affairs, retired in 71. It's charging the government's approach is too limiting. He teaches economics at Carleton University, following our extracts from an article in the current issue of Canadian Public Administration. And what he's pointing out here is how the government works. And this is highly visible and is a good illustration of how all bureaucracies work, whether in government, education, or business, large business especially. And he says that it is true that governments do come up with new programs, as in the fields of manpower policy, education, medical care, etc., but these are mostly attempts to achieve old norms more efficiently. That is, to work faster with the old jalopy, the old goal. Now, in areas of real innovation, the attempts have been ill-considered and are rarely subjected to an ongoing process of improvement through controlled experimentation. That is, there's very little innovation that goes on in any large institution of any kind. The institution inhibits it. Now, John Kenneth Galbraith, he goes on, I'm just reading some excerpts from him, has shown how naive the conventional view of business is, namely that it produces what the public desires. On the contrary, he finds that business devotes substantial resources to altering preferences by persuading the public to buy things business chooses to produce, despite the fact that the goods and services are not initially wanted, not particularly useful, and often not very safe. Now, this is Galbraith's thesis of how it works in large institutions. Now, the district goes ahead.
By the way, when they say the word business, you see, it's a nonsense syllable, because if you look at any business, to find out who runs that business, how do they make decisions about anything, then it's a completely different situation. The word business does not tell you anything, whatever.
Exactly, because it doesn't tell you anything about the hidden environment. And the hidden environment in all of this bureaucracy are the assumptions of the literary world in which we are brought up, our Western civilization.
Go ahead, let's have some more of his. He has some pretty good themes.
Consider, for example, the short takeoff and landing program. What urbanite really wants short takeoff and land aircraft operations from the heart of a city? Similarly, for the vast array of useless military hardware, we don't need to go into the highways, social welfare programs, and so on. That is not to say that we don't require policies for dispense for transportation for the poor, but what we get bears little resemblance to what the public wants and what its priorities are. Rather, it reflects the growing power of government to impose its will on society, a development that we must be carefully examine. You notice how he judges. He isn't a process man, but he points out. He makes an inventory.
He sets up a great big conflict between bureaucracy and politics.
Yeah. Big business can guarantee its survival by eliminating competition, and it does this through merger or through outright purchase. Governments have no real competition, particularly because among themselves they are generally agreed to abide by the status quo. Now we go on. Sole access to information essential to sound decision-making, the growing irrelevance of all MPs outside the cabinet.
None of that now. That's the structure. Growing irrelevance of all MPs outside cabinet. Why? No access to information.
The marketing of political images rather than ideas by the same firms.
The cabinet members have access to information that the MPs don't have. And so there's a complete gap between the civil service and the politicians.
But just note, the public attitude to governmental failure at the bureaucratic level is one of cynicism. The bureaucrats are assumed to be shiftless, incompetent, hostile, remote, and reactionary. Much of this is not true, but the failure remains. And so we must try to understand it. So it goes on. The bureaucracy is oriented toward specific historical norms. That is, things which are always based in the past. In an early area, these norms are easily identified and separated because society itself was separable. A one-dimensional administrative structure could give a reasonable assurance that it would not influence or be influenced by other norms. That is, as a man on the top.
Where does he come to the point about inside an actual bureaucracy, everybody works to push up.
Okay.
the existing structures.
All right. There is no reason to expect the bureaucracy to transform itself from a vertical to a horizontal or multiform norm focus. That is, there's no reason to think that the bureaucracy is going to change the rules whereby it can elevate its own status.
Yeah. But
no senior bureaucrat will willingly relinquish power, and particularly the power to set priorities. His strength derives from the size of his bureau. There you are. And its size is based on the effective pursuit of the department's norms.
now, this you're getting into some awful verbiage there, Barry.
I know.
There are some passages that I marked, I guess not in that passage.
Well, no, there's not.
You don't have my
got
copy.
yours.
Look, the ordinary bureaucrat, in order to enlarge his own bureau, say he wants to add a foot to his space, he has to push the boys on top of him up 10 feet in order to get 1 foot more for himself. Well, this is the exponential problem in bureaucracy. In order to get your way down in the lower echelon, you want a little more for yourself. You have to elevate the boys above you, change their lives, their salaries, their operation 10 times bigger so you can be a little wee bit bigger.
It's like single-handedly trying to lift the pyramid, isn't it?
You know. Now this is the weird circumstance.
Yes, it isn't said in here. That's what it's implied, and this is the thing that we were
It says
discussing.
it somewhere. I have marked it.
No, it's not actually said. What is actually said is simply this: it's that the whole structure is, and it isn't said.
Remember, in a bureaucracy, it is not the boys at the top who run it. It's the men underneath who run it.
The men underneath who always run the bureaucracy. And
The top boys don't run anything.
And it's not the politicians who have the information. That's what comes out of here. Even though the cabinet makes the politicians relevant, it's the civil service that provides the information to the cabinet, and this is a monopoly of knowledge which they maintain in such a way as to enhance their position within the bureaucracy. Now, this is their
But in order to enlarge, in order to have one more secretary way down in the scale, you have to push the man above you way up into a much heavier, give him 5 secretaries so you can have one more.
In order to increase your salary, you have to find another level in between you and the boys below, is another way of putting it. As if you're at a decision-making level at the top, and you want to show how important your job is to the government, you have 2 ways of doing it. 1, by maintaining that monopoly of knowledge, and 2, by creating another layer below you.
Below you of what? Made of what?
A bureaucratic level. That is another level in organization.
But is it of information or non-information?
Just another level of organization in the organization chart. That's what they mean by one-dimensional management. You create another title which creates another level throughout the civil service hierarchy. You find within the organization system another name.
By the way, the boys up higher are useless because they're not in touch with the information levels. Now let's keep that in mind, that the higher civil service don't have access to the information. It's the middle management area.
Well, it's really the man on the job who is confronting the public that has the information, and the man on the top has information as to how to operate with a politician and how to operate with other bureaucrats in a role where he doesn't lose his own position, but gains on every move.
More than the
He enhances
information
his
he
salary.
has
Now, this
the
is exactly
authority.
what happens in a large organization.
More than the information in the civil service, the senior civil servants have the authority to deal with the government, which other civil servants don't.
That's right.
But not the information.
But the information comes from below. Now, the same thing applies, and this is really just quite visible in the government bureaucracy, and it's always used as a whipping boy for something else, which is the whole assumption of our Western world that the man at the top knows what he's doing, and the men at the top on the bottom don't. And the man at the top deserves his big salary and his big office and his big staff. And his big staff is used to enhance his position. He not only deserves it, but uses it to enhance his position. So you have this syndrome of...
But in actuality, it is not this way.
In actuality, this is the way the system is kept alive. It's kept alive. This is the appearance of the system. But this is not what it actually does, because the men who do the work are not the men at the top when it comes to dealing with the problems. The men at the bottom.
Do these same rules apply to the nanny bureaucracy? Or is that,
Nanny?
the nanny bureaucracy, or is that?
No, that's passé now, but that's another situation that we might well have something to say about in a few minutes. There's another book, Saving the Appearances, I'd like to be reminded to mention to you. It's a little paperback that you want to latch onto by Owen Barfield, but we'll come back to it too. Let's dispose of this one then, Barry.
Okay, well, the final statement here perhaps disposes of it. There are two statements. The growing scale and complexity of the decisions have made it easy to exclude the public from those decisions. The bureaucracy keeps the necessary information confidential.
All right, now take what's happening at this moment in Vietnam and Hanoi and so on, and the government and the bureaucracy and the State Department and so on. Where do you think the information really is?
It's all processed. It's all interpreted.
And remember that one of the big factors in their information problem is public response now. Public response has become one of the big factors in the situation that they're working in.
I think the Nixon public response to him power there is the ability or the effect of going completely against public response. I feel that he sees this as a sign of power.
Oh, yeah.
If 99% of the people are against something and he does it, this is a manifestation of it.
You know, on the other hand, remember he's surrounded by people who are very dependent upon that goodwill of that very public. This same article, before we drop it, mentions, consider highway engineers, this is the last column there, who have roughly the same attitude to transportation as their colleagues in the auto firms, the factories, and highway construction companies. That is, the government. Engineers and planners share exactly the same outlook as the assumptions and the same patterns of information and decision-making as the business world.
The same hidden assumptions, the same hidden environment.
They lower the private cost of driving, induce greater demands for highways, and hence their own services. The same ability of public bureaucracies to use their technological interdependence with other bureaucracies in business to support their expansionist objectives can be seen in airport construction, in housing programs, in research funding,